Hello and welcome to VHTV, your guide to the talent, culture, and capital forces shaping the hard tech startup ecosystem. My name is Seyka Mejeur, CEO at AdAstra Talent Advisors, and I'm joined by Matt Gjertsen of Better Everyday Studios. Hey, Matt.
Hello.
And Justus Kilian of Space Capital. Hey, Justus.
Hey, Seyka.
Thanks for joining today, and we are diving into a topic around vision. So I've got two ideas here. I'm trying to pull it into one kind of idea forming. Some companies that I interact with have build incredible tech and follow the saying that if you build it, they will come. Others think it's really important to know the market demand before building the technology. And some biggest success stories come from founders who can see the market demand before anyone else. So a funny thing kind of spurred this idea in my mind. I lost my Apple Watch in my house, and I had already been thinking about quitting my Apple Watch, but I lost my Apple Watch even when I was using the Find My feature, couldn't get it to ding, couldn't find it, and I was like, okay, this is a sign. I'm kicking the habit and getting rid of my Apple Watch. I loved it. I loved it, you guys. I love it. I'm Apple Watch free, no tan line, no pings. I realized that I thought I was using it because I like to record my workouts. I don't ever actually look at that information. I just record my workout and then, I don't know, I think I get extra points for it, right? So even though I set my notifications, they still somehow sneak in. I'm getting pings throughout the day while I'm busy, right? Getting those notifications. When I'm with my kids, I'm getting a notification about a text and it's pulling my attention. It's spiking my cortisol. It wasn't actually serving me. And yet I wore that thing for years. And I posted this on LinkedIn and I started seeing people say, yeah, I got rid of my Apple Watch or I got rid of my smartwatch. And instead I'm wearing my Oura Ring or my Whoop that's measuring my health stats and my sleep. And I have an Oura Ring and I love my Oura Ring. But when I first heard about Oura Ring, I thought, what the heck? Where are all the features? Why doesn't it tell me the time? Why can't I read my text messages on it, right? This is a very, very real thought that I had. Hey, it's just as expensive as a lot of this other wearable tech. Where are all my features? At the time, these founders identified a market need surely before I did, and I think before a lot of other people did, because they're still putting out these multi-feature tech products, right? They understood that we're moving into 2026 and tech is truly about reducing things. It's about reducing mental load. It's about reducing information and cognitive load. So at a time where people are looking for more and more features, these were some founders that were able to go, information overload has already begun, and humans are going to be looking for tech that's talk less and listen more. And that sort of identification is really valuable. Simplicity is winning, and those founders saw that early. So I'm bringing that into this idea because I've also seen companies that go, I'm going to build the hardest tech possible, and once I accomplish these incredible technical feats, the market will appear. And we've seen that fail. We've seen that not be the case, right? That they are too early for their time. One example of this is there's a project called Google Loon where they wanted to put these stratospheric balloons up into the stratosphere to be able to do, telecoms. I'm not sure exactly what their market approach was. And they were building all of this tech, but it was too early. It was before its time. And so timing that correctly, being able to see a market demand even before it exists, it's an art, it's a science. And so one, I'm just curious about your reflection with this whole big meaty topic, and then I've got a few key questions to dig into here.
Well, I think, this is a fascinating discussion, and space tech is sort of littered with companies that are obsessed with the technology, just sort of diving in head first and saying like, hey, we can build this thing. Like, sure, it will solve everybody's problem. And it's got a new bell and a new whistle and it's, going to do all these important things. oftentimes that technology is developed completely disconnected from the end user who wants it. That's actually, I think, a structural problem with, how sort of space has evolved and matured over the years. And it wasn't always that way. There was some periods where it wasn't, but it has been. And I think one of my favorite examples of that failure that I guess has turned into, a win was Planet Labs. We were an early investor in that company. They've gone public. They're now actually trading up pretty well. But early on, they were a pioneer of this idea of the Dove satellite, CubeSats, very, very early satellites, and are very, very small satellites that could image the Earth at lower resolution, but higher revisit rates. And, they believe that if they were able to get to a point of daily revisit, that they'd be able to solve some really important problems. Well, sort of the secret underneath is they did this, they built it, it was really cool, but nobody wanted that data. Nobody was willing to buy it. And so they ultimately had to end up acquiring satellites that were better geared to customer needs. And they spent a long time then adapting like their data and their technology to be able to sell into markets. And so that's just one example. Like they've now found a good sort of equilibrium in the market with what they've built. But, there was a period of 5+ years where they were just building something that nobody wanted, but it was so cool. Investors just kept giving them money.
So your initial point, Justus, that our industry is littered with tech that's built for being really cool tech without necessarily understanding the market or the end user. One thing I see to help with that is having conversations with people such as yourself, right? I will often introduce early founders or pre-founders to you and say, hey, I talked to my friend. He's got a really great perspective on the market, because it's useful to have a thought partner who's able to really talk those things over with you. But I'm curious, what other solutions are there? Is it pulling in people who are more on the business side, who understand who are able to map out strategy for where this product is eventually going? What other recommendations do you have to support for that?
I think the engineering problem and the architecting of a prototype often distracts from the first lesson of startup, which is like getting out of the house and going and spending time with your customer. And like it's so easy, it's so much easier in sort of the software world. You just build something, you sort of get it in the hands of somebody, and you just literally start collecting feedback. With hardware, you got to build this thing before anybody can actually give you feedback. But that really isn't true. Like, you really should be dedicating time to deeply and intimately understand your customer's need and what problems they're facing, and architect a solution for that. Planet would have taken that approach. The Department of Defense, they would have, which is one of the biggest customers for Earth observation data, they would have pretty quickly realized that this sort of low resolution wasn't particularly valuable. There's been some segments that they have found it, but yeah, it would have quickly sort of redirected them in a new area. Now, there are counter arguments to this where the best products and the best founders, and Apple is a great example of this. Nobody could have understood that the iPhone was probably the right way to redo and rethink and sort of design the phone, right? And the potential that could bring. And, Steve Jobs has always said, like, don't ask your customers. They'll tell you what they think they want. They won't tell you where like the opportunity actually is and how to be a visionary on the product side. And so I think those two worlds, that sort of dichotomy between like build what your customers absolutely need versus like a visionary product leader that say build what your customers don't even know they need, is as at sort of opposing forces. And so both can create success. I think the latter of building, the visionary product is way harder to do and much more sort of disconnected from market feedback. And it's just sort of it requires a unique human, a unique product, a unique time for it to all come together and work.
Yeah, because I mean, you mentioned Apple, and I agree with you. Like they have had a history of doing that, and yet, kind of one of the latest major products of Apple Vision Pro. That's what, like the third or fourth major attempt to bring like an XR wearable to market. I can't even imagine how much money has been spent trying to create that product, and it still hasn't landed, has yet to land. Yeah, and you were right to highlight, I think, the difference between software and hardware, and that's what makes this such a challenge. But I don't think that means there's still many ways to create. I think there are ways to go after hardware building where you're kind of attempting some kind of MVP. And that honestly came to mind to me is Uber. Even though that's a software product, it has a very physical component of the cars, right? And I don't know how true this story is, but the kind of apocryphal story of going and raising money early on, and Travis is out there, meeting with people and doing the app, and a car shows up 30 seconds later. That was all fake, right? He had placed those cars but he knew that's what could be true if the app gained enough significance and had enough market share. There would be cars that would be that close. And so that was an example of kind of creating a minimum viable product in a way of like showcasing what the solution could look like to verify that there's a need there. And I think there's one founder advisor that I've talked to a few years ago who told me when he talks with successful founders and startups, the biggest difference is that the most successful ones are not product obsessed, they're problem obsessed. There is a problem that they see out in the world that they are obsessed with solving, and whether it's software, hardware, whatever it is, it's just a way to solve that problem. And so I think when you're thinking about what is an MVP that could test this, getting out and talking to people, it's making sure you're understanding the problem and building to a problem versus coming up with a cool technology because you think it's cool.
I have a great example of that, just to add a little bit of color to a recent company. Founder and CEO at a company called Reflect Orbital, and they're trying to build deployable satellites that can reflect sunlight back here on Earth and like light up an area at night. And so for them to demonstrate this to their users and sort of how the end product or service could look, they rented a hot air balloon. And they used, a large spotlight and flew up very high, and then used like their phone to like essentially simulate geolocation and ordering sunlight to a specific area, and then literally showed at night a spotlight sort of pointing over to where they were at and illuminating their position. And like everybody could then understand and realize and actually sort of conceptualize like what this thing could look like if they actually built it. And it was just kind of this, oh, wow, that's fundamentally different, right?
I love that because it's like a really perfect example of doing this kind of MVP. It's not software where it can be done so cheaply, but maybe you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars instead of millions or tens of millions of dollars to get that initial proof of concept. And that's, I think, the way to think about it.
We're tapping into something really cool here. There's a lot of what we're talking about that is kind of this interwoven tapestry of what it is to lead a hard tech startup. You mentioned Steve Jobs. If you haven't read Steve Jobs' book by Walter Isaacson, I highly recommend that book. It's incredible. You feel like you get to really witness some of the genius and the magic that he was able to cultivate. Much of it is hard to conceptualize because he was pulling in such diverse backgrounds and passions of his into creating these products. Is similar in my mind, that concept of creating something that your customer doesn't know that they need is Ford. I believe the quote was, if I asked the people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses, right? And Matt, this touches with your point of being not product obsessed, but problem obsessed. We're able to link those two ideas pretty intricately here by saying Ford identified the problem that he wanted to solve and was not so concerned with the function of how that people outside of his zone of genius and his vision and unique ability saw the path to the solution, right? So you don't have to identify, we don't have to be, white knuckling on the product, white knuckling on the solution that we see. We need to be anchored to the problem that we're solving. And then just as linking to what you were just talking about here is it's with Reflect Orbital, we can see the strategy to create a solution and then telling the story and illustrating the story is such a key piece of being able to get us to those next steps along the technical roadmap, right? What are those next milestones? How are we illustrating for our customers the solution that we're creating so that they can get it in their bones and then help inform us, right? And so it's a two-part, it's this beautiful dance that we're incorporating of being able to go, I can see something that other people can't. I'm figuring out how that thing I can see connects to a real world problem now. And then I'm able to illustrate this solution that other people can't see so that they can then partner with me in creating it, both on my team and as my customers, educating me more deeply on what I need.
And ultimately, I think that gets to the second part of your question too, of like, this idea of having simpler products, less feature-rich products, because you're getting to the core of, kind of on both sides of, if you're, problem obsessed, then you're trying to deliver like minimally what you need to solve that problem. But then also on Justus's side, it's like, you just don't want to build as much initially to test it out. And so it can really help on both those sides.
Yeah, really, really cool that communicating that throughout the organization in order to get people rowing the boat in the same direction is also just a key intricate piece of what we're talking about here. And yeah, really fun conversation. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.